Welcome to the Cyber Talent series, where we explore how organizations are closing skills gaps, accelerating onboarding, and building high-performance cybersecurity teams. My name is Phoebe DeVito. I'm joined by my co-host and co-founder of MetaCTF, Thomas Rogers. And today we are speaking with our guest, Emily Long, founder and CEO at Edera. So welcome, Emily.
Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate you having me.
Perfect. We can dive right in. So the first question, Emily, is just, can you tell us about yourself and what you do now?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm the founder and CEO of Edera. We're a hardened runtime. It's like isolation container security company. And we started the company in April of 2024. So it's been about a year and a half that we've been around. But today actually is the 1 year of our seed announcement that we're chatting today, which is very exciting. So we've done a lot of building. But before that, I was the COO at ChainGuard. And before that, the COO at Ancor. And before that, I had a long career in people and talent before I ended up in high-tech CEO world, which is kind of a funny path, but one I'm very excited to be in right now. So that's kind of the short story of my journey.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll definitely circle back to some of your previous roles as well later in the discussion, because you've had such an amazing career. One question I had, so Edera's catchphrase is move fast, don't break things, or that's, a great tagline. So curious what that means to you and how it guides the way that you think about building and securing technology.
Yeah. So many people might be familiar with like move fast, break things. I think it came up in the early days. It might have even been like a Facebook thing back in the day. We have the alternate view of like, just because you move fast doesn't mean things need to break, particularly in this world of kind of like emerging AI usage, that going fast and breaking things has a lot more consequences now than maybe it used to. So it's not just about iterating fast and then dealing with things when things go wrong. Things going wrong can be catastrophically wrong, whether that's data leaks or any sort of, vulnerability issues. So we're kind of sitting here saying, why don't we kind of take a step back and architect technology so that you don't have to have both of those things being at odds? So can you still move fast and make sure that things aren't breaking as you go? And so we've really targeted most of our build around our technology, around making sure that what we do from a security perspective is efficiency focused and speed focused, because we know that if you have to choose one or the other, most of the time businesses are going to go toward pace because that's kind of what the system rewards. And we really don't want that to be the case anymore. So most of our decisions have been around making sure that those two things can exist together. So don't break things, but still move fast. That's why our catchphrase is kind of like that.
Well, speed is obviously a big part of what y'all are doing. You said 1 year ago was your seed, and I know you've done an A too and have built an awesome team. Would love to hear just your, people management, how you've built that team, like what your thoughts have been. I think this is your first time starting a company, and if not, yeah. So just how'd you think about doing things on that side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, I think in startup world, this is my third like true startup, fourth tech company that I've worked at before I was in financial services. The thing you realize really fast is that this is not like a hero mentality game. I think the industry kind of paints this like funny picture. It's like there's this one founder who's this genius, and without them, everything would not exist. There's some truth to the idea generation and some of like the stuff that's holding this together. Like, my co-founders are, incredibly technically gifted, but we would not exist and be moving fast if we didn't have a team that you can rely on completely. So my philosophy on talent, it's kind of like this joke, like I collect people as I go places. Like if I find really great people, I white knuckle them as much as I can and hope to bring them through. And one of the things I'll say a lot is like a company is a point in time, but the relationship is what carries forward. So obviously Edera has a special place in my heart and many others, because with the founding and early generation, obviously we have a lot of skin in the game. But I have people here that I work with that this is our fourth time together. Some are 3 and some are 2, and then some are new. And we meet and hopefully we continue on together. But my philosophy on talent is you start first with the people you trust. And if you're doing a good job being a leader that people have loyalty to and want to be a part of whatever you're creating, then it's amazing what people will leave to come do something with you, even when the risk is higher. I mean, by all accounts, going into a startup, particularly when I even had a team member come before we even had seed funding, because, believed in the mission, believed in the team, believed in the relationship. And I'm forever grateful for him. I mention all the time, like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for just yeeting yourself out into this. But I think that there's a really important thing that people don't think about so much. And that is loyalty to the people, to the mission, people knowing that when you operate in good faith, that you're going to be there to protect your team and to do something really great. So started with that. And then you have to start talking a lot out in the open about your value system, what you're building, and start to attract people that want to be part of the whole picture, not just part of the technology, which is important. You need people to care about that, but are they also buying into the vision, the culture, the feel? Culture has a kind of a loaded word now, but the value system, like, do people want to operate the same way? And that's really what I focus on a lot, is people want to be part of something more than just creating something. They want to be part of a vision, of a mission. And high performers, though you want to pay them well, of course, but early on, there's more of the upside in stock. It's amazing what high performers will do when they believe in a mission and a vision. It's not just about high cash comp at a large corp.
So y'all do a great job of presenting a very unified front publicly. Social media, I love, all the things that y'all are doing, but it's everyone really. Like I see there's a lot of engineers that don't want to put that stuff out there. How much of that is like a concerted effort to be unified publicly, and how much of that is just kind of natural?
Both. I think that early on, people seeing your content and seeing your value system and seeing your tech is so important. Some people will say, oh, if you just build it, what's the field of dreams? Build it and they will come. In a crowded startup ecosystem, that is not, in my experience, true. I've learned a lot about making sure that you're forward about what your values are and what you're thinking, what you're building, and then people will come because they know to ask. So we do make a concerted effort internally to, every time we have like social posts or things going on, that we're sharing them so that people can easily find what it is that we're doing. We also very much encourage front-facing stuff to the extent people are comfortable. Not everyone does it, but a lot of people do, and mostly because we talk a lot about educating the team on why it matters. I think that sometimes it feels like showboatiness or like self-aggrandizing or some sort of like personal brand building. And in some ways that it's true, people do want to follow people that they see as people they want to be around. But so much of it has to do with just continuing to talk about the things that matter. And we make sure that we don't over curate stuff, that things are in people's voice. But we have a how we work guide internally that talks about things from, what we care about to how we solve conflict. And we give people frameworks so that we can have open dialogue. So I think a lot of it is curating this shared, common, consistent understanding. Every week at every town hall we have, company-wide meeting, I share the same strategy deck with the same reminders. And one slide is like, we love to fail. We got to do that. And if we don't use that work, that's cool. And having a sense of humor about things that don't go right is great. And making sure we're all focused. And one of the line items of the 4 focus areas right now is brand and awareness. And so everyone is kind of behind that, but it feels unified, but it's still a unique voice. We try not to over-engineer or write things for folks so that they can still speak in their own, way.
I love the consistency of that. I'm sure some people are probably like, oh, Emily's showing this again.
I make a joke. I'm like, we're at the time where everyone multitasks. Here's my presentation.
But like eventually, you wear on them.
Yeah.
It's important. Like those are the things that matter.
And I think sometimes people misunderstand that, like, I've said it and therefore people will remember. And it's not that people aren't smart and capable, but there's so much going on. Once a week, if you can just stop and be like, what are the 4 things we care about? And is the time I'm spending aligned with those 4 things? And I want people to keep questioning, am I spending my time aligned with business priorities? It's really easy to get nerd sniped and shiny objected here and there because there's so much stuff to do.
Yeah. So I think you have really unique perspective. Is like, one, you're like in a really technical space. I think a lot of people, maybe wouldn't even know, really wouldn't understand. It's probably one of those things where if you had to explain it to your grandmother or something, it'd be kind of tricky. But I'm curious, looking back, like at your background, like how much you take from, your days in people operations, how much you took of that to, chain guard and your other sort of leadership roles, and then how that's shaped, how you build teams, manage teams now.
Yeah. I would say it's morphed a lot. I've learned a lot. And one of the most consistent things I've seen, but you kind of curate a skill set around it, is that the most distracting things and the things that take you away from like work productivity and goals is inefficient communication and lack of confrontation and conflict resolution, because it's scary and hard and vulnerable and all of the things which we want to pretend like isn't important. Like, it's just like code, get it done, there's the roadmap. But when someone doesn't feel heard in a meeting, they get discouraged, and then all of a sudden they're ruminating on it, and then somebody talks to somebody, and then a gossip culture creates. And despite all of that, companies can still succeed and push through, but there is a point where it starts to break. But early on, it can have really severe effects, founder quarrels and infighting early on, and then team disagreements. And so a lot of my time and people and just general operations, we had a very deliberate start here where, that how we work guide, the conflict resolution is very consistently held. We have a no gossip culture. We have a one strike rule when it comes to being that kind of like smart asshole kind of vibe. Like if I'm going to come in and be mean and raise my voice, you got one shot. And after that, it doesn't matter who you are, founder, myself, because the moment that people feel unsafe is the moment that people won't raise a hand when something's inherently wrong. So it's just, I think the understanding of people is really important when it comes to making sure everything functions correctly. And that's really where a lot of the people stuff came in, is to be able to enable a team to be very, very functional. And it is constant work to do that. And when things seem to be naturally just going well, that's because there's constant work to do that. Somebody says, oh, somebody upset me at a meeting. I'm like, did you tell them? Go do it. I'm not going to play middle person unless you need me to mediate. People solve their own problems here. And we encourage that, because then, everything gets humanized versus this, particularly in a remote world. So a lot of my people stuff, I would say, is very powerful when it comes to managing, because it's a very different skill set than being an engineer or really creating a product roadmap or doing something that we would inherently deem as technical. And it doesn't mean that I am not a technical person. I have to understand our business, our strategy, the tech. But just because I'm not writing code doesn't mean I don't understand. But I can't expect people, just because they're people, to understand how to deal with people. It's a skill set too. And in this industry, you don't put enough time and effort on appreciating the complexity of human beings and how much that can distract you from a functioning business. So that's really where a lot of my, orientation and all that comes in.
Awesome. I want to bring up one question really quick, just because you mentioned, the difference in what it can mean to be technical. And you did a really great post on LinkedIn recently that was posing this question of what does it mean to be technical? So I'm curious, what are some of the responses that you got and how you've seen that showing up in your career?
Yeah, I had a very defining moment with a mentor right before I took my first COO role, because it involved me going in and managing a technical team. It was support and professional services, very, very technical engineering kind of crew. And I remember sitting with this friend, a mentor, and I was like, I am not technical. And he was like, never say those words again. Like, the only reason you're not technical is because you believe you're not technical. And he was like, it is a self-imposed limitation. And he kind of came at me, and I was like, oh my. But it was one of those, I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, the movie, where it's like your feelings. If you have, there's these core memories you have that embed in this very distinct moment in your life. That's one of my core memories that I always come back to and go, whoa, we place so many inherent limitations on ourselves because we just think, I'm a soft skills person, or I'm not this, or I am that. And all of a sudden this kind of world opened up to me and go, oh my gosh, I can be technical but not be an engineer. So my view of technical has morphed over time, because I used to think it was oh, I'm an engineer, I write code, I, understand backend infrastructure, therefore I'm a technical person. So my opinion has morphed. I can be technically minded, understand infrastructure, follow strategic kind of paths with engineers, and still be able to be helpful and think big picture, even though I'm not writing code. I pose the question because I get a lot of insecurity from people who aren't engineers to not put themselves out for roles that have technical oversight. And I hear sometimes, people who are sitting in what you consider to be traditional technical roles, both saying that other people aren't technical or calling themselves not technical. And then I'm like, what does it mean to you then? If you're not technical, then there's no help for any of us. And I remember my co-founders early on telling me that I was a very technical CEO. And they're the most deeply technical, smart women I've ever met. And I'm like, how is that? So there's just such a different definition. So anyway, to frame it, the responses were really interesting because it was kind of all across the board. The word is garbage. We should stop even using it. It's the meaning it has no meaning anymore. To technical means something different depending on the audience. Are you technical in this field? I could be a technical accountant. I could be a technical HR professional in operations. I could be a technical, but orienting it to the right field is important. So it was just a very interesting kind of mix of, I've thought of this in many different ways. So I don't know. I think it's just something that I think about a lot to challenge, again, what words mean, because we use them so sweepingly as if everyone understands them the same way, and that can have very unfortunate effects. And also it limits many people from getting into different disciplines or jobs that they could otherwise really learn a lot from, so long as that limitation is kind of removed.
I saw a tweet last week. It was something about like one of the most valuable positions in a company is someone who understands technology and can communicate it clearly. And a lot of people were kind of like roasting that person because they're like, this is what sales and marketing is. Hello. But I mean, I think there are a lot of engineers that do a really good job of that too. And like having a big part of that is like understanding who you're talking to and like translating, your knowledge so that that person can understand. I do think from our side, there's a big part of that translation layer of like, what is it that we do? And like, how is this person that I'm talking to, like, how are they intending to use what I'm trying to say to them to like do their job? I think coming at it as someone like you, like, you might call me non-technical, but I have like a very strong interest in technology and have spent a lot of my career in that. And I think coming at it from like vulnerability and knowing like, I don't have to have all the answers. And that doesn't mean that I'm non-technical. Like I can ask questions. And I think that builds, to your point earlier, like building trust with teams. Like I'm not going to go up and pretend I know something I don't, but it doesn't mean that I'm, non-technical necessarily. But there's a confidence gap too. You got to understand like, okay, it's okay that I don't know everything. So how'd you do that, like confidence wise?
So, like when they say children learn really fast or like they can learn new languages, and I can't remember which book it was. I think it might have been an Adam Grant. It might have been the Hidden Potential book right next to me by Adam Grant. But the opening is about how the adults can learn languages just as fast. The only difference is that children are unafraid to be wrong. Like they'll be like, "Oh, I said it wrong." And then we correct children naturally because they're children and we're learning and we're teaching. But as adults, it's like, I'm not going to try to say that phrase because I'm going to sound like a dodo. And so I'm not going to do it. And then we just never get corrected and we never learn because we're not willing to look like we don't know something. And one of the big things I did early on when I took my first role managing tech teams, I had a team member then who is actually at Edera now. This is our third time together, but I asked him to teach me from the beginning so that I could have orientation. And we would literally have sessions. He had a whiteboard behind him and wrote Professor James on it. And we started from the beginning. What is a container? What's a container orchestrator? What, because there's a lot of stuff I generally knew and was exposed to, but being in back-end ops like finance or HR, you're not thinking about it in the same way. You can have an industry kind of understanding, but you don't go into the nitty gritty. And I just started learning. I even had a meeting this morning where we're talking about some integration of some open source technology into our product. I started with saying, can we go 4 levels up? Yeah. So, and then we can bring me back down with you. So it's not to say that I'm not smart enough to go deeper, but I do need to start foundationally where you can bring me along. And as long as you don't see that as a bad thing, you have so much power to learn. But what I've found is that most very technical people, and I'll use air quotes when I say that, like let's say engineers that you're learning from, love to teach. And they love that you care. Just like think about your discipline. Like I think about when people go, hey, teach me about how you did, fundraising, or teach me how, and I love that people care to learn something new. It's just, we have to remove this part in our brain that thinks that somehow makes us dumb for not knowing. And instead it makes us really interesting for being curious enough to ask. So I think part of it, I had to break down this perceived notion that someone's going to think I should already know that. But most people, in many situations, I've had people look over and go, I'm so glad you asked because I did not know that either. So I kind of aspire to be that person that goes, oh, thank goodness she opened the door to that.
Yeah, totally. So I want to step back a little bit because I know you've run, Chain Guard's technically a startup, but they're
much bigger now.
Yeah, have done some stuff. And I know you've worked at bigger companies in the past. So I'm curious your thoughts on this because, we talked to different, frontline managers in security. Just how do you help, develop individuals? I think professional development in general and like performance review, that kind of all that like people management stuff it's not really, it's not specific to cyber, obviously. Like every people manager, if you're managing like a McDonald's, like you have to like help people like get better at their careers and develop. So what have you taken from that? Like, do you have frameworks?
Yeah, I think a lot about it. I mean, at this stage, I try to keep the org as flat as possible. So mostly because at this size, the more layers, the more abstraction, and like things are moving so fast and there's not a lot of us. So I mean, there's about 21 of us, I think now. That's helpful. But for me, when I look at management holistically, big company, small company, the one consistency that is most important is picking managers who want to manage, not because it's a career path that is the only way to go up, and not because they want to get more power and authority, but because they want to manage people. And one of the biggest things I've seen go wrong at any company size is that you have managers who don't want to be managers. And it doesn't matter what process or protocol or whatever you put in to try to create consistency. If they do not want to be a manager, meaning providing coaching, giving constructive feedback, like see that as a proud point of their career, then it will fail. It just does. I have done every single performance framework you can think of. The 9-box, no ratings, quarterly, monthly, daily. I mean, but the key consistent thing is pick people who want to do that job. And as an industry, particularly in tech, we haven't done a very good job providing paths of progression for technical folks who do not want to people manage. And so you inadvertently just end up giving this job that you think they can just manage because you just need somebody to do it, and everything starts to break. I've seen it over and over again.
How do you figure out if they want to manage? Because some people might think they want to manage, or some people might just be like, I'll do it because I like Emily and she asked me to. Yeah, how do you figure that out?
You have to ask, do you like conflict resolution? Do you find not necessarily joy? Because like anytime you have to deal with performance issues or something that's hard, like anytime I've had to let someone go, I almost always have to like take some time and have an emotional reaction to it because you feel the impact on someone's life. But I care that you feel that impact. I care that you tell me that you feel that impact. I care that you say, I find it rewarding to being able to help people even when the discussion is hard. And I am willing to put myself out there and have that dialogue because I know that the purpose is good. Like you have to have people who you can tell have a genuine interest in doing the hard parts, not just psyching people up. Because early managers, the thing they'll talk a lot of is, I love encouragement. I love mentoring. I love teaching. And that's a great part of it. But the truth is when things start to go wrong is when like true managers who like to manage see that as important. Like that's an important part of my job that I do not want to whiff. Not I'm going to push it off or try to move this person to another team so that I do not have to deal with it. Now, early stage, it's hard because I think a lot of people say to you that they, like you said, how do you tell that it's genuine? But behavioral interviewing for management is important even when you're internally promoting if you have not seen enough of them being proactive to conflict manage on their own. So you have to like tell me about a time when you had to have a difficult conversation with a teammate. How did you feel? Was it hard for you? Why was it hard for you? What did you learn? Because you can learn a lot from how people describe encounters. Just the subtleties of the word choices they use can show whether or not they see it as a meaningful part of their role, not a obligation.
Yeah, totally. I guess another question on that, sort of evaluating people before they join you. And it sounds like you've done a lot of like bringing people you already know and trust, but the vetting stage, how do you do that? Especially with engineers, I'm sure you have, people you trust on your team that can tell you, yes, this person knows what they're talking about. But you have to do it too. And I guess, maybe it's like a little bit of like a role player thing. Like my job as Emily is like, is this person a good culture fit versus, some of the other things. But yeah, how do you think about role delineation during evaluating, is this person a good fit technically or behaviorally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the culture fit interview has been stigmatized a little bit. The kind of question like, would I have a beer with this person? Like, I think that is a very dangerous way of approaching bringing people into the team. Our kind of what you consider to be like culture fit interview has a lot more to do with like value sentiment. So like, what are your values? How do you handle, again, conflict? What are you passionate about within a team? When you have a strong opinion, how do you communicate it? Because there's a lot of people at Edera that probably wouldn't want to hang out with me on the weekend, and that's fine. We respect each other. But part of it is that we do think differently, that we aren't going to just all go on a boat adventure in the summer, because then you end up with a lot of people who are the same, which is kind of counterintuitive, particularly if you're trying to cover a full personality wheel or technical kind of wheel, whatever you're trying to kind of fill. So I think it's less like, do I like this person socially? Though you have to not have a huge, abrasive kind of interactions with each other to know that there is, but usually if you align on values and there's a shared respect, then the rest of it all kind of comes together. Like we have people with different, political views here and people who have different views on their hobbies and all of the things, because that's what makes a good, diverse company work. But you have to curate that and just make sure that when we're all going to align back to those values, like if you start to yell at someone, it's at you're out. I don't, like I got friends who yell, they're not gonna work here. You know what I mean? Like I can hang out with them. They're fun. They're the fun people you go out with, but they're not the people that you want to spend, a stable work environment with.
That's awesome. 100%. I think that's something that I have so enjoyed. I haven't started a company, but I've had the opportunity to work with a bunch of startups, including MetaCTF. And I think what I love about it is just speaking to what you said about values and mission. It's always, I think, such a privilege to get to work so closely with someone who cares so deeply about it and really cares about building a team of people who care deeply about something. And it kind of transcends your, background. And like you said, what you do on the weekends, what job you even had before. It's just really cool to kind of unite around a mission. And I've always felt that when I worked on teams. So really cool to hear your insight. Pivoting a little bit, I want to talk about, you kind of referenced earlier, you previously served as the CEO at Anchor and ChainGuard. And in those roles, I'm sure had the opportunity to oversee a whole slew of departments, and some of those being L&D, recruiting, technical content, and training. So, at MetaCTF, we care a lot about skills development and the ability to empower people to learn and, whether that means in their current role or pivot to a new role. And so would love to hear if you have any lessons or best practices that you saw made for successful kind of learning and development programs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers to this because I think depending on what you're teaching, I have different opinions. But we kind of alluded to this earlier in a way of like making sure that you're talking about things people care about or that apply to them. But I think whenever any training is being developed, if you don't start with like the WIFM, the what's in it for me, for anybody who's showing up, you're missing it. Because if you're just going like, you should learn all this content, but it's like, what is the person coming to you to do? Do they want to be an expert in something technically? Do they want to like feel like they can teach it themselves? Getting an understanding of why people are showing up is very important as you start to curate what it is that you're doing. So I spend a good amount of time making sure that whatever it is that we are creating content for, whether it's technical or not, that you're framing it in a way that somebody understands that what they're going to get out of that is going to be aligned with what they want to get out of that. I think we sometimes miss it because we're just trying to get information out there. But if the information isn't curated to some sort of want, then you've kind of lost somebody from the start. I've also found that anytime you can do live and in person, or even anything that involves remote, that if you do role play or any sort of element where you put ownership onto people who participate is incredibly powerful, particularly when you're teaching things about management. Like management trainings have been, over the years, I've evolved them quite a bit, but the majority of it now is role play and putting that ownership and allowing people to make mistakes and being able to correct and nudge in a kind way gives people a much faster path to being able to actually handle things that are really hard. But most of the time you're reading a slide about what to do when something happens and you feel like you have those skills. But what if I come to you as somebody with a problem and you don't know what I'm going to say? What do you do in that moment? But that's a lot of proactive stuff that you need to be able to have time and engagement for. But to me, the most effective stuff that I've tried to do have been small group role play and really focusing on the core components of like what somebody wants to get out of something, and then being able to do fun interactive storytelling to some degree because people have very short attention spans.
Have you done much with like quantifying the effectiveness of those?
Only through surveys and things like that. And I will particularly anything that involves like people-oriented management training check in over time. What I have found with really effective trainings is you don't have to, because they will come proactively to you and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that role play because this happened to me and I was able to not trip over myself. But that comes from, people proactively sharing. I think sometimes trainings, they're hard to quantify the long-term effects of them. I probably could learn a lot more from the both of you than what I would do because you see it so much more than I do. But I think a lot of the stuff that you do in L&D and training, people want to see a spreadsheet, but I think there's a lot of qualitative value that we need to be appreciative of, that you can't always just use the quantitative components of it. I've always been somebody, even in board meetings, being in the people realm, it's like, give me a graph of all the things I should care about. And it's like, I can, and you're going to show me a financial statement. But what I'm going to tell you is so much of this qualitative stuff that we're doing is ending up there, but you can't put it in a cell. And I feel very passionately about that with kind of like L&D and training to some extent, because it's a behavioral change more than it is like a quantitative thing all the time.
Yeah, what's the ROI of doing those? Like, I'm sure people ask.
Right. It's like, well, I'm like, well, like not catastrophic lawsuits, but the lack of something is hard to quantify, right? Like, so when you have something to count in a cell, then I care, but I'm a preventative person. I'm trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. So you can count 0, but it's not, when you look at a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes, nobody cares about you when everything's going right. And then when something goes wrong, all they care about is to blame and ask questions. If it's like, that 75% of the time everything's going right is also the point. So I find that to be a really interesting thing.
I think there are ways to measure like engagement in those types of training, even like technical training, where you're actually like trying to develop and grow skills, like build new skills. That's step one. I tell our customers all the time about, hey, you have to like know what you want, and you have to communicate that to people before you can actually start delivering these skill development programs. Because the most important thing is for them to show up and be interested and care. And then you can start actually like building and developing new skills. We're trying to do some stuff around quantifying, and NIST NICE has like, work roles, and they define things like that. I think it's contextual. Like, it depends on the organization. Like, some companies are going to really try and do that and care about it. And some are just going to, go with hey, we had, 40 people show up. That's great. The whole team showed up. Awesome. Yeah. It's like, great.
Whether they use it or not, is it relevant?
Yeah.
Like to me, and like, I'd rather have a smaller group who's participating than a larger group who's multitasking. And sometimes it's hard to quantify that. But yeah, it is important to quantify. I don't want to, come across as not data driven, but I do think there's a lot of these types of programs that your belief that it's important is kind of the point. You put time into things that you believe are important, whether or not you can quite put your finger on why in the moment, but you start to see that over time.
So I used to work at Workday, and I was joking about the ROI thing, but one of my main jobs at Workday was helping to justify the cost of Workday to customers, because Workday is incredibly expensive. And one of the metrics that mattered to us at Workday is like the impact of like employee experience, engagement, retention over time. Obviously, there's a natural amount of churn that's good, healthy, I think, with a business, but employee retention is very important, and churn is expensive because you got to create new job recs and all that stuff. So I'm curious your thoughts just on retention, all the things that you think about, care about, performance, people management. Do you think about employee retention, or do you think about that as like an output that's going to, come from doing the right stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very complicated question, because there's like it depends to that. Like, I think, I can't remember the exact stat, and I'm going to muck this up, but it's like interviewing is like 13% effective or something like that. And then you do these like work assessment things, like a project, and it gets you to 20, whatever. It's all less than 50% likelihood that you will be correct, that you have actually evaluated someone for the role in a way that would be like longevity. It doesn't mean that you don't further define and try to figure that stuff out, but you will inherently get it wrong. And people who are really excited about being somewhere might change what excites them, and then that place is wrong for them. But I think sometimes I've been in many situations where it's like a right or a wrong. Like, they're supposed to be here, and if they don't want to be here, it's out. Or like, oh, they're not. It's so much more convoluted than that. And there's also stages. It's like somebody was really great at the early stage, and maybe they don't want to be there, or maybe their skill set changes. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with anybody, or anybody did anything inherently wrong. So I think we overcorrect for the wrong things. So when I think about retention, I think about it more of, if there's like a high turnover rate of employees for whatever reason, that like timeout, what is going on? Is there a theme? But sometimes you're going to have like ebbs and flows where there's highs and lows, and it's logical. Sometimes it's illogical. But if you're being a good leader, then you're constantly going to see people leaving and coming. so long as it's not contentious on the ins and outs. And people say like white glove service in and out. I think more about that. Like, how do people feel when they're leaving, whether or not they've chosen to or not? And then I know that we're doing the right thing. For example, I've had team members, a couple companies ago, as one example, where I told somebody this skill set needs to be focused on for you to be here for this next vision, this next step of this company. And they came back to me and were like, I don't want to focus on that. I'm like, baller. I'm so glad we had that conversation. Love that for you. What's next? Right. And there's an honest dialogue. It doesn't mean that they're not capable, but we're being clear about what's required. And so they will leave, and that is the right thing, versus just like trying to square peg round hole and force people into stuff and performance issue and drama. So it's like, if you're being honest about what's required and people feel safe enough to say that they don't want it without feeling like you're going to push them out the door and they're going to have job insecurity, then that rotation will be very natural versus unnatural. So we're not always going to get it right on the interview. People aren't always going to know what they want when they come in, even when they say it. We've already talked about that. Like, how do you know they want to be a manager? How do you know you want to work at a startup? It's a great question. I don't know. You think you do, you go there, oh, geez, never mind. Put me back into Workday. You don't know. And there's no right or wrong answer. So anyway, I think as long as you have low judgment and good communication, retention has context. It's not just about like a percent. Because if you're having good dialogue and you're preparing for it and you've got good kind of like, I don't know, being able to fill backfills thoughtfully because you're having dialogue versus everything feeling like a surprise, then retention has, again, context.
Now obviously ChainGuard's done a lot, has an awesome product, and now you're, in the process of building that. But obviously our jobs as startup founders is to build something that people want and use and make their jobs and lives easier, hopefully. How much do you think about, from the customer, like the end customer that you all are ultimately selling to, how much do you think about those dynamics for them? Like, how are they going to use this? How is it going to impact their day to day? Yeah. Do you think about that stuff?
Oh, all the time. Everything that we do has a person at the end. Like, even if we want to say we're outsourcing to AI and all these things, okay, sure. There's going to be like, I'm a belief that AI is an efficiency gain, not a replacement, but that's a whole nother argument for another day, for depending on who sits on both sides of that. But so to me, it's like, if you're not thinking about the WIFM for everyone, for everything you're doing all of the time, it's a miss. So it's like, if I'm an end user and we know what problem we're solving, so for us, it's like we're hardening your runtime, we're making it more secure, we're keeping your alerts down, or, if we're looking at all the things like what makes your life easier, and have I communicated that easily, and had I made it easy for you to, like, what is it, like time to value, TTV, or like ROI, like, you have to get there as fast as possible. So that's the funny thing about, we talk about different skill sets necessary. It's like, you have to understand human nature to solve anything. And like, that piece of it to me is really important, of like, what does your customer care about? And people want to work with people that they trust, that believe that you care about them. Even in a big company, like, there's some stuff you get forced into, sure, from a tool perspective, but most of the time people are going to back people that they believe care enough to get them to have a better life. It sounds like kind of dramatic, but it's like, aren't we all just like trying to help each other just get done with stuff faster, like hate work less, actually enjoy work? Maybe that would be like a great goal. And if we can help facilitate that by making it easier, then I mean, I love that. So we think about that constantly. What is it going to mean from an end user? Are they going to care? Does it create friction? It's constantly on our minds.
I feel like I'd say all the time about how like the people stuff still matters, like with in security, especially. I feel like every vendor, every trade show you go to is like, we're going to replace, this team or that team or whatever. And I agree with you. Like, I think it's a, more of a efficiency gainer, especially at this point. But I feel like that's a good theme for this episode. Is like the people stuff is so important. It still matters.
It is. And again, I think people don't take time on people things because it is misunderstood. I don't want to have that conversation. It's going to just like drain me, or I'm just going to tell them, just do it already. Just go. But you end up getting hit on the time part on the backside. So like, people think that they're being efficient, but they're just pushing it down the road and probably making a more catastrophic problem for themselves later. And that's the thing that I think, when people don't have a high degree of emotional intelligence and or do not value people as much, or conflict resolution or conversation, they think about it as like, oh, someone's being too emotional or too. I just think that that's somebody not wanting to put the effort in and just deal with something and put themselves in an uncomfortable position for a moment. And if they put themselves in an uncomfortable position for a moment, they can save time, versus dealing with this big catastrophic explosion at the end, which will come. I've never heard it in the history of ever from anybody dealing with like a conflict on a team that they go, man, I'm so glad I waited so long to deal with that. Right? Like most of the time
Yeah.
everyone goes, man, if I would have just like dealt with that 3 months ago. I'm like, yeah, I know. So it's like that kind of thing. Like performance issues have something to do with output of the team. Anything conflict, internal drama has everything to do with time efficiency, output, technical impact. For us to disassociate those things as two different things, or it's wrong.
And yeah, I couldn't agree more about the human layer of all of this. And it's been really, honestly, it's been really encouraging throughout this podcast. Almost everyone we've brought on has brought that up in some capacity. And I think it can feel like it's you feeling that way in your day at work. And it's so encouraging to hear so many amazing people working in the cyberspace and just in the workforce who really do value that, especially as a people manager. So really appreciate your insights. I guess we have one wrap-up question we do. If you were starting your career in cyber now, what is one thing that you would tell yourself?
Don't worry about feeling stupid, and don't worry about not knowing something. The more eager you come in and the more willing to learn and not worry what your title is or what you're doing day to day is so powerful in this industry, because everything changes so fast. And we get caught up with what's my level, what's my this, what am I? If you can just go in and start tackling whatever you're given and be unafraid to say you don't understand something, the rate of progression that you would have, particularly now, is going to be exponentially faster, is what I would tell myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to have you on, and we're so grateful for your time.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Cyber Talent Series. If you enjoyed the combo, make sure to subscribe on Spotify. Also follow us on YouTube and subscribe there. We'll be sharing content there as well. For ongoing tips on hiring, retaining, upskilling your cyber workforce, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and check us out at MetaCTF.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.